Heritage of the heart. India has always been home to sages and spiritual teachers. But unfortunately, despite the long-standing teacher-disciple tradition here, having a guru has been looked down upon in recent times, at least in some of the circles I was in. The common perception seems to be one of being subservient to someone else, giving away one's power, and so on. The irony is that we all have been guided by someone or the other, right since our birth. First, by our parents, and later, by our teachers in school and college. Then why are we so reluctant to take the help of a guide to navigate life's choppy waters? The help of someone who has been there, acquired the experience, found their peace, and is thus able to shine a light on the road ahead for us. I was never on the lookout for a guru and didn't even know what having one meant. Yet, destiny graced me with a guru. The way I met my guru had nothing to do with me or my inclinations. My sister Nikki, who was studying in Hong Kong for a few years at that time, was visiting Mumbai with some of her friends from there. This was at the beginning of the year 2000. Her friends had flown down specially to meet a sage who spoke on the subject of Advaita, non-duality, and whose name was Ramesh Balsekar. They were quite impressed with the first satsang they attended at Rameshji's home and highly recommended that I too visit this modern-day master. I had absolutely no interest in the subject matter, but my sister dragged me along the next Sunday, saying it was the least we could do as we lived in the same city as Rameshji, and that too only 20 minutes away from his residence. I recall that I found the talk not quite engaging, but was amazed to see a global audience listening attentively to him. There must have been at least 30 people in the small room in which he spoke. What was even more amazing was to see them all chanting bhajans in Marathi after the satsang. The only thing I remember is that he constantly repeated that whatever happened was the will of God. I thought that was stating the obvious, so I wondered why he belabored the point. My own life experience thus far had proved that none of the major happenings in my life were in my control, beginning with the loss of my father when I was 14. I saw no reason to ever visit him again, but found myself going back the next Sunday. And the one after that, and after that, for almost 10 years. Obviously, I had been hooked without my conscious mind being privy to the whole process. On my second visit, seeing people line up to touch his feet, I joined the line too. When it was my turn, he said to me, "Be careful, young man, this could become your Sunday church." I found the teaching so easy to relate to. What Rameshji spoke was simple, at least for me. By and by, over the next few weeks, I was exposed to the deeper aspects of the teaching, which I readily embraced. It also helped that Rameshji himself was so easy to relate to as he spoke fluent English. He had studied at the London School of Economics and was the general manager of one of India's leading banks, a man of the world, so to speak. The emphasis of Rameshji's talks was simply on peace of mind in daily living. Something as simple as that. No theories, no quoting extensively from scriptures and such like, but simply this. As Ramana Maharishi said, the ultimate truth is so simple. It is nothing more than being in the pristine state. That is all that needs to be said. There was nothing Rameshji said that I did not agree with. I didn't need any convincing. His entire teaching was wrapped around the concept of non-doership. In other words, nobody truly does anything. Why? Because whatever we do, whatever decisions we take, are based on two factors: our genetics and conditioning, neither of which we have control over. And who made our genetics and conditioning, which constitute our nature? God did. So, we are instruments through whom God's will functions. The entire teaching was summed up in one sentence of the Buddha's, which he quoted ever so often. Events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer of any deed. Of course, I am oversimplifying it, but it is just to give the reader a gist of the tenet of his teachings. His oft-repeated quote was, "Consciousness is all there is." After attending Rameshji's talks for quite some time, I asked myself and others what the term guru exactly meant. I came across many definitions, such as the remover of the darkness of ignorance, the giver of light, spiritual weight, and so on. To me, he fitted the bill. I saw all events that happened in my life in the light of his teachings, and it undoubtedly grounded me in peace of mind. It was a natural fit as far as I was concerned. So yes, I concluded that he was my guru. We are so hardwired to think that the guru is another human being, but in reality, it is our own higher self in the form of another person who then reveals the knowledge to the aspirant. I got this understanding after seeing a drawing my mother made after she saw the entire process unfold in her meditation. Many years later, I heard a talk by a sage which echoed my own thoughts. It was quite uncanny. He too mentioned how, in childhood, our parents are our gurus, and in school and college, our teachers become our gurus. Therefore, what is wrong in following someone's guidance through the trials and tribulations of life, especially when that someone has our best interest at heart, as they too have walked on the same path? I suppose that is what it was for me. While I attended Rameshji's satsangs over the years, I also had the opportunity to meet many spiritual teachers, yogis, swamis, people gifted with special abilities, and so on. Somehow, our paths kept crossing. Also, being in the spiritual book publishing business facilitated these meetings and encounters as well. I was quite drawn to some of these spiritual stalwarts and had the good fortune of spending time with them when they were not surrounded by people. In the process, I learned a good deal from them. Yet I found that I kept going back every Sunday to Rameshji's home. Nothing appealed to me more than the simplicity of the teaching and the simplicity of his being. When someone asked him why he wore a plain white kurta pajama every morning at the satsang, he answered, "So there isn't any projection." That pretty much summed up the man he was. My good friend Gabriel Halfon put it very well when he said, "God took the form of a simple, unassuming, grandfatherly figure who would walk into his living room every morning and simply sit in his chair and share his thoughts on peace of mind in daily living." And so, while it became clear to me that Rameshji was indeed my guru, a pleasant coincidence is that much before I met him, his presence had already graced my home. A cousin had gifted my mother the book, Consciousness Speaks, which had a photo of Rameshji on the cover. For a long time, I hadn't registered that the man I had started visiting on Sundays was the same person on the book cover, The penny dropped only when, one morning over breakfast, I happened to glance at the bookshelf in the passage and saw the cover. The books had been rearranged in the weekly cleaning of the bookshelves, and this book had been placed up front. However, I must say that perhaps I was connected to the lineage even before I met Rameshji, a conclusion I drew from a particular event. One day, probably after a couple of years of visiting Rameshji, I was having chai after the satsang with a friend. He mentioned that while there was no samadhi of Rameshji's guru, Nisargadatta Maharaj, there was a samadhi of Maharaj's guru, and it was close by. He asked me if I would like to visit. I said I would love to, and we jumped into a cab. To my astonishment, the cab reached the Banganga cremation grounds, a place I had dreaded since the age of 14, as we had cremated my father there. When we alighted from the cab, we walked into the enclosure and sat down to remove our shoes. As I did so, I realized it was the same ledge I had sat on with my sisters when we watched our father being cremated around 17 years ago. While I was lost in the memory, looking to the far right where the pyre was burning at the moment in the past, my friend pointed to a slab of marble just about 15 feet ahead of us, which marked the samadhi of Siddha Rameshwar Maharaj. The first thought that struck me was that the same samadhi was in front of me in 1984, but of course, I was oblivious to it. Siddha Rameshwarji dropped his mortal coil, or body, in 1936. It seemed to me that the teaching of this lineage had brought me back to the very same spot that was a defining moment for me, the one that had shaped my entire life since the age of 14. The defining moment for me was that of death and the spiritual journey, one of understanding that the phenomena of death was much more than merely the death of the body. It was the death of the ego with its sense of personal doership. After connecting the dots, I got a sense of being watched over, as it were, by this parampara, or lineage.